On last week's Have I Got News for You, we incorrectly said that Jeffrey Archer had been bankrupt. We'd like to make it clear that Mr. Archer has never been made bankrupt, and we apologise to him very sincerely for any distress that this error may have caused.
Christmas films on BBC Two. Oliver Stone's Oscar-winning portrait of the Vietnam War, Platoon.
I don't think I'm gonna make it out of here. Understand what I'm saying to you?
Everybody gotta die sometime, Red.
An illicit love affair in Africa, White Mischief.
May I take your photograph?
Well, of course, but whatever for?
Jock insists I photograph anything that takes my fancy.
Steven Spielberg's epic film version of the Pulitzer Prize winner, The Color Purple.
You show is ugly.
Kenneth Branagh's stunning directorial debut, Henry V.
And on you noblest English!
Christmas films on Two.
Bell-bottoms make their last stand in 15 minutes as the decade draws to a close. Caftans, guitar heroes and supergroups become the sounds at the end of the 60s. Now on BBC Two, slightly later than scheduled, the news and sport introduced by Jill Dando.
Two passenger trains have crashed in the middle of the Severn Tunnel, injuring 100 people. British Rail say there were problems with the signals on the track at the time. And the Russian president has said there's little hope of Mikhail Gorbachev keeping the Soviet Union together. Good evening. British Rail have said there were problems with signalling in the Severn Tunnel this morning, and that this may have been a factor in the crash involving two passenger trains. About 100 people were injured, 10 of them seriously. The crash happened just after 10:30, 1 mile inside the Welsh entrance to the tunnel. The 8:30 London Paddington to Cardiff intercity train was travelling slowly through the tunnel when the 7 o'clock Portsmouth to Cardiff service, a much lighter Sprinter train, crashed into the back of it.
Emergency services described it as the nightmare scenario, two trains colliding in the middle of a tunnel. The first of the casualties were taken from the trains some 2 hours after the crash. Most had been on board the Sprinter train. Many suffered severe crush injuries to the head and spine. The most seriously hurt was one of the drivers, who had to be cut free from his cab. The walking wounded spoke of no warning before the impact, which came in the total darkness.
It happened so suddenly. It's just a ban, just panic and blackness.
Well, I was in the rear train, the train that crashed into the train in front. I was quite near to the front of the train, which actually connected with the front part. All that happened really was there was a sudden loud crash. The lights went out. There was panic for maybe 20-30 seconds. There were a few screams and everything, but after that everyone was quite calm.
Fire and ambulance crews converging on the scene had to use breathing equipment and infrared monitors to reach the passengers. Hospitals in Bristol and Newport implemented a pre-arranged emergency plan as they took the dozens of injured. British Rail announced they were setting up an immediate inquiry, and they revealed there had been signalling problems. The driver of the first train had been warned by telephone, but they said they had no idea why the two trains had collided at about 30 miles an hour.
There were some precautions taking place because of some signalling difficulty, yes.
What stage in the morning did that become apparent?
That's been underway for some hours, in fact.
But do you have any system to show whether or not the second driver was given the same caution?
Not at this stage. That's what we're checking.
Despite admitting they did have a problem with the signals, British Rail said tonight their investigations will be looking at every possibility, from mechanical failure to driver error.
The Transport Secretary Malcolm Rifkin said tonight he was very concerned to hear of the collision, and he praised the rescue services who he said were excellent in bringing people out of the tunnel. Police have issued 3 emergency telephone numbers for relatives and friends. The number to call in Newport is 0633 877 999, and in Bristol either 0272 211 381 or 0272 230 888. President Gorbachev's attempts to keep the Soviet Union together have been dealt a heavy blow by the Russian President Boris Yeltsin. He said Mr. Gorbachev's efforts had all but failed, and that the Soviet republics should try instead to create a new commonwealth of independent states. From Moscow, Ben Brown reports.
Within a few minutes of arriving in the city of Minsk today, Boris Yeltsin all but buried President Gorbachev's hopes of keeping the Soviet Union together. In the Belarusian parliament, Mr. Yeltsin said the republics may as well abandon their talks on creating a new union of sovereign states. Fewer and fewer republics, he said, want to take part, and soon there'll be no one around the negotiating table at all. So Boris Yeltsin is busy looking for alternatives to Mr. Gorbachev's plan, and one of them is a possible union between the Slavic states of Russia and Belarus and the Ukraine, whose President Leonid Kravchuk also came to Minsk today. Together, the big 3 Slavic states account for some 70% of the Soviet Union's population. Mr. Gorbachev said today that he still believes his union treaty will be signed and that most people here want to keep the country together. But that may only go to show how out of touch the president now is. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
President Gorbachev has sacked the head of the Soviet army, General Lobov. His replacement, General Samsonov, who was one of the army officers who opposed the attempted coup in August. General Lobov had been visiting Britain, where he'd been taken aboard one of the Royal Navy's nuclear submarines and returned to Moscow only yesterday. The official reason given for his removal was poor health, but the Soviet news agency Interfax said he was sacked because of delays in the reform of the armed forces. President Bush has taken part in a special service to mark the 50th anniversary of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The air bombardment killed more than 2,000 Americans and brought the United States into the Second World War.
Dawn at Pearl Harbor, where exactly 50 years ago America at peace was attacked without warning. Under this simple floating memorial is a war grave, the battleship Arizona, where more than 1,000 men died, most of them still entombed beneath the coral and barnacles. The name Arizona still visible, the memory raw. Thousands of Pearl Harbor veterans traveled to Hawaii for today's ceremonies. Among them, one of the few to have survived the Arizona bombing, radio operator Glenn Lane.
Fighting a fire back there when she blew and she wiped me clear off the ship. Too many good young men had to be sacrificed.
President Bush, a naval pilot shot down by Japanese guns in World War II, came to the Arizona Memorial and laid a wreath to the war dead at the spot where drops of oil still rise to the surface from the crippled battleship.
With each drop, it is as though God himself were crying. May God bless them. May God bless America, the most wondrous land on earth.
The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor still cuts deeply, with veterans and today the president frequently drawing the same lesson. The price of peace is eternal vigilance. Gavin Essler, BBC News, Washington.
The Serbian-led Yugoslav army has made new attacks against towns in Croatia today. But it's been generally quiet around Osijek and the port of Dubrovnik, where up to 18 people were killed in yesterday's bombardment. The Army High Command later expressed regret for the attack. This is seen as yet another sign that they're not fully in control of local forces. Here, a Labour Party disciplinary hearing is still meeting in the West Midlands to decide whether to expel the MP for Coventry South East, Dave Nellist. It's alleged he has links with militant.
After the expulsion of his close colleague Terry Fields, Dave Nellist knew his chances of surviving weren't very high, but the Coventry MP still hoped the disciplinary tribunal would clear him.
Getting rid of me from the party, like tragically they did that Terry Fields on Thursday does not help Labour's chances in the general election one iota. So I repeat, I go in as a Labour MP, and hopefully this afternoon I'll come out as one. Thanks very much.
While hoping for the best, his supporters were preparing for the worst, standing against an official Labour candidate at the election, when the image of a family man would stand him in good stead. It's a move his wife would encourage.
I would like him to stand, yes, independently. I'm quite confident that the people of Coventry, I speak to them on the streets when I go shopping. I know he's got the support in Coventry.
But it was the presence of militant organisers and their newspaper sellers which the Labour Party would see as justification for their action against him.
The Serious Fraud Office has begun examining the files seized from Robert Maxwell's headquarters yesterday. Officers are trying to find the £350 million missing from the Mirror Group pension fund. Mirror staff have offered a management buyout of the paper. Today's Daily Mirror described a bugging device in the office of the paper's finance director, which led to Maxwell's own tape recorder. And now, with news of today's sport, here's Rob Bonnet.
Victories for both Leeds and Manchester United have increased the gap between them and the rest at the top of the First Division. Rod Wallace scored Leeds' first goal at Luton midway through the second half. 2 minutes later, Gary Speed effectively settled the match. And Brian McClare scored one of 3 first-half goals in a quarter of an hour, and Mark Hughes the last, just 9 minutes from the end, as Manchester United overwhelmed Coventry. Amongst the chasing pack, Aston Villa and Manchester City, with Villa comfortably winning their match today. Cyril Regis scored Villa's first, and the second came just 5 minutes before half-time through Dwight York. It was his 6th goal in 7 games. City, knocked out of the Rumbelows Cup in midweek, did hint at a revival when David White got one back, but 5 minutes later Villa ensured their win with the game's most spectacular goal scored by Tony Daly. Aston Villa 3, Manchester City 1. So it's looking even more like a 2-horse race this evening, with second-place Manchester United 9 points clear of Sheffield Wednesday. They beat Chelsea 3-0 today. Manchester City dropped to 4th, Aston Villa go 5th, Arsenal play at Nottingham Forest tomorrow. 4 non-league teams have survived to tonight's draw for the 3rd round of the FA Cup. Kettering of the GM Vauxhall Conference won their second-round match at 4th Division Maidstone 2-1, and Woking, last season's giant killers, won 3-0 against Yeovil, a club with an even greater FA Cup tradition. But there was also qualified success for Farnborough Town and a definite 3rd-round place for Crawley.
For almost all of the match at Plainmoor, it seemed that Farnborough Town of the Vauxhall Conference would be going into tonight's 3rd-round draw for the first time at 3rd Division Torquay's expense, courtesy of Simon Reed's first-half goal. But then, with only 3 minutes left, Mark Lorham's spectacular strike earned Torquay a replay. Crawley of the Beezer Homes League, having conquered Northampton in the last round, might have deserved better than being drawn away to Hayes, but from the moment Tim Hume gave them a first-half lead, they were on their way to the 3rd round and the possibility of meeting far more glamorous opposition. Then, 3 minutes from time, Hume made sure that the whole of Crawley will be tuned in to the 3rd-round draw in Match of the Day later tonight.
Today's draw for the quarter-finals of the Rumbelows League Cup has produced an outstanding tie in Leeds versus Manchester United. The First Division's 2 leading clubs play each other at Elland Road. Tottenham, the FA Cup holders, take on Norwich at Carrow Road. 3rd Division Peterborough, who beat Liverpool, are rewarded with a home match against Middlesbrough, and either Swindon or Crystal Palace play Nottingham Forest or Southampton. In Scotland, Hearts still lead the Premier Division thanks in part to Scott Crabb's penalty, the second of his side's goals at the bottom club Dunfermline. And Alex Mikhailichenko scored Rangers first as they beat St Johnstone at Ibrox. So the gap at the top remains 2 points. Celtic drew 1-1 at Dundee United, while Hibernian drew 0-0 with St Mirren. The favourites Leeds are through to the final of Rugby League's Regal Trophy, but they had to come from behind to beat Salford by 22 points to 8.
Salford, quarter-final conquerors of Wigan last week, and sensing another upset today when centre Martin Burkitt gave them the lead with only 9 minutes gone. Salford's adventurous approach, which had earned them 6 successive wins before today, brought them a second try as Gilfillan's soccer skills breached the Leeds defence and put Salford ahead by 9 points at half-time. But Leeds, even without the injured Ellery Hanley, were about to justify their rating as Regal Trophy favourites. Their captain, Gary Schofield, began the fight back straight after half-time. And when, minutes later, Goulding's pass released prop forward Mike O'Neill for another try, Leeds were ahead for the first time in the match. Salford's resilience brought them another try, but Leeds had the initiative and secured their place in the final when Schofield's pass released Paul Dixon for the game's decisive score. Leeds the winners 22-15.
Finally racing, Kings Fountain has confirmed his promise by winning the AF Budge Gold Cup at Cheltenham. Kings Fountain will now work towards the Cheltenham Gold Cup after his 6th victory in 7 races. Described by Peter O'Sullivan.
Kings Fountain still has a length and a half advantage as they jump it. Kings Fountain lands in the lead from another Coral. Third, Torrenfield racing into the closing stages. Kings Fountain from another Coral, Torrenfield, and then Ida's Delight. Kings Fountain is going to win the Budge Gold Cup in great style under Anthony Torrey to get him off the 13 mark. Kings Fountain is the winner. Second is another Coral.
And that's all for now. The main news tonight is on BBC One at 20 to 10.
On Monday evening, David Dimbleby chairs a special debate discussing whether Britain would benefit from deeper European integration in an extended edition of Panorama at 9:30 on BBC One. And Breakfast News will be following developments in Maastricht from Monday morning on BBC One at 6:30.
Good evening. We've got a few sound problems in East Anglia at the moment, partly due, I'm sure, to this large area of high pressure, which really isn't moving anywhere at the moment. It's going to be with us for several days to come, killing off the weather fronts as they encroach into far northwestern parts of Scotland from time to time. So basically the weather's staying very much the same. We've got very light winds over central and eastern parts at the moment, already turning pretty misty, and some thicker patches of freezing fog developing like last night. In fact, they didn't clear in parts of the Vale of York today. So some dense patches showing up later on tonight, but with the winds in the west, there shouldn't be any such problems. Some icy patches on the roads are quite likely though, but this thicker cloud up in western parts of Scotland may well give the odd patch of drizzly rain from time to time. Temperatures inland then tonight about -2 to -6 degrees, really very chilly indeed. That's nigh on 20 degrees Fahrenheit at the lowest. Tomorrow then a murky start in many places. That mist and murk gradually clearing away as the morning goes along, the thicker patches of fog probably hanging on until about lunchtime in actual fact. And still the odd patch of drizzle running through the Western Isles up into Shetland as the day goes along. Temperatures there about 8 degrees with the breeze blowing. But further south, once the sun comes through, I think we find temperatures struggling once again. Only about 4 or 5 degrees, and a bit lower than that, of course, maybe only +2, if that fog is rather slow to clear. Monday's chart's very much the same, so again the weather is going to be very, very similar. And that's it from me for now.
Kieślowski's award-winning interpretations of the Ten Commandments, starting tomorrow, 11:05 on BBC Two.
On BBC One in 10 minutes, a fantasy adventure film featuring Jeff Bridges as Starman, a friendly alien who transforms himself into the image of Karen Allen's recently deceased husband. Here on BBC Two, we're beginning a musical interlude. In half an hour, a Spanish double bill of works by composer and pianist Manuel de Falla. Nights in the Gardens of Spain is illustrated with images of the spectacular grounds of the Alhambra Palace, and that's followed at 8:35 by Master Peter's Puppet Show, an opera completed in 1923 that employs puppets and singers in a fairy tale based on the misadventures of Don Quixote. First on to, from our own home shores, the swan song of the sounds of the 60s.